after we introduced i32 preprocessor execution environment, so that's the 64-bit processor. So the 64-bit operation mode, they are using the compatibility mode. Remember, our hardware continue to improve, become bigger, but the existing code already being able to run from the 16-bit or 32-bit environment. So that's why, in order to make sure after you change the new hardware, but the existing software can still be run and without recompile, so then we need to make sure the new operation can be worked from the existing 16-bit to or 32-bit to the 64-bit environment. So the existing 16-bit and the 32-bit application can usually run without recompile from the 64-bit environment. In the 16-bit Windows and the DOS system, they're using the Win16. So this one actually is really out of date. So that's why they cannot be longer to run in the 64-bit Microsoft Windows. And also 64-bit Windows doesn't have a virtual DOS, the DOS machine subsystem to take advantage of the processor ability to switch into the virtual 8086 mode. So that's why you can see in the 64-bit environment, we not really have any MS-DOS can use that. So the 64-bit mode, the processor run application that's using the 64-bit linear address space. So that's mean earlier we told you, right? Your 32-bit environment, your memory address need to store in the registers. So the regist size only up to 4 bytes. So we only can have 4 gigabyte memory. But now after you extend to the 64-bit, so that means we can store the memory address up to 8 bytes. So this native mode for this 64-bit Microsoft Windows, they enable all the 64-bit instruction operand. So then we will see those registers being updated to the 64-bit environment. On the other hand, we can have 8-byte register size, how they will affect our hardware or the memory operation. So this you will continue about the 32-bit basic execution environment. So we see how they're moving forward to the 64-bit environment. So the first thing we need to always make sure is backward compatible with the x86 instruction set. So even your hardware changed, but sometimes your software still run on 32-bit environment, you need to make sure they are backward compatible. So now since our regist, also later we will show you the general regist in the 64-bit environment also extend to the 64-bit. So actually they can allow a virtual address up to the 64 byte. Remember, because you were using that 8-byte memory to allocate the memory address. So that's why the memory address can be up to the 64 exponent. So then the unit is byte. So what is really 2 to the 64 exponent? Actually, we told you, right? So your 30 is gigabyte. So even we know 40 is terabyte. But honestly, I don't know after terabyte what it will be. So that's why our space can be up to the 64 byte. But so far we don't have that yet. Okay, so then we'll show you later. So then you can see here later we'll show you the general purpose regist. In 32-bit environment we only have 8. But in 64-bit we have 16. So then how about we talk about this general purpose regist? So I just show you in the 64-bit what that's 16. Okay, so remember in 32-bit environment we have EAX, EPX, ECX, EDX. So EDI, ESI, EBP, and ESP. But all those 4, so this 8 general purpose registers from 32-bit, we call E, we start from E. But when they move to the 64-bit environment, they change become R. So all the RAX, RBX, or RSP, they are 8-byte registers. They kind of like extended from the 32-bit environment. Then we add 8 more. So that's why total we have 16 general purpose registers in the 64-bit environment. Okay, so since we have that, right? So remember we told you, you're using the RX, just refer to that 8-byte. And we need to make sure we will be the backward compatible. So that's why RAX, the first 4 byte, can still access by the EAX variable name. Oh, not variable name, the register name. So that's why you will see in the 32-bit environment, we're still using EAX, EVX, ECX, EDX, this A8 general purpose registers. So they are still available. Okay, and also they are the first half for those 64-bit general purpose registers. And that's we're using the 32-bit environment. And also since we already increase 8 more general purpose registers in the 64-bit environment. So then the first half for those registers can be accessed, you add with the D. So R8D refer to the first 4 bytes from the R8 register. So that's why here we only have this 16 registers, but depends on how you want to access each register. If we want to access 8 bytes, you use RAX. If you want to access the first 4 bytes only, you call EAX. If you want to access the first 2, you're using AX. So then they still have AL and the BL. So then you will see here is your operand size and the available register name. So that's very important concept. You only have this 16 registers, but depends on how you use the register name. That's the operand size is different. So that's the 16 general purpose registers in the 64-bit environment. Okay, continue, see what else. Okay, so one thing is about the floating point register. It's exactly the same as 32-bit environment. We still only have 8 80-bit floating point registers. So then about the status flag, our status flag from E flags change become R flags. So this register extend from 4 bytes become 64. 4 bytes become 8 bytes. So 8 bytes is 64-bit. But even we give them 64-bit, but we don't have that many status flag. So that's why they say they're only using the lower 32-bit. Okay. So then your instruction pointer become RIP. Of course, 64-bit. So then your MMX register and XMM register is MMX is the same, but one thing is the XMM from 32-bit environment we extend to the 16. Okay, so that's the change from the 32-bit environment execution environment to the 64-bit change. So now I want to talk about the last one is here. Right, in the 64-bit environment, we have 8 bytes to save the memory. But we just reserve for that. So far, our hardware is not that big yet. So like earlier we told you, right? If you remember, I show you here. So your 2 to the 10th power is 1K. So 2 to the 20 is 1 mega. So 2 to the 30 is 1 giga. So then continue, actually 2 to the 40 is 1 terabyte. Okay, so far we know the terabyte. So 2 to the 50 or 2 to the 60, we didn't really know that yet. So that's why here, when we show you, even you can have 64 bits allowed to use. But so far, the physical address, we only have at the most 256 terabytes for RAM. So that's why even we have allowed to have up to 64 bits. But so far, in practice, they're only using the 48 bits for now. Because so far, we only have the biggest RAM is 256 terabytes. So, right, eventually, when the hardware got improved, then, yeah, we can get improved to have to access bigger memory address. So that's in the 64-bit environment. So just a couple more things to remind you. In the 64-bit mode, a single instruction cannot access both a high byte register and the low byte register at the same time. What does that mean? That means the AL and AH, they cannot be accessed at the same time. So even you have the 64-bit E flag, 64-bit R flag register. So they're only using the lower 32-bit. So that's earlier we told you, because we don't have that many status flag. So the status flag basically is exactly the same in the 32-bit mode and the 64-bit mode. So earlier when we introduced you the carry flag, overflow flag, the sign flag, they are all the same from the 32-bit environment and the 64-bit environment. So that's the 64-bit environment.